Joshua is an incredibly fun unit to use in Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. He's got an awesome crit animation, he doubles everything, and he's got the best drip in the game. I mean, just look at the hat. The man is slaying in more ways than one. He's also an interesting unit in that I find he tends to be really over or really underrated. Some people see his great speed and the big critical hits and they bump him straight into S tier, while others lament his lack of 1-2 range and his low move and let him ride the bench shortly after his join chapter. If you saw my Eirika mode tier list earlier this month, you know that I have him in C tier, which is pretty much smack in the middle of the cast. But he's a unique C tier in that I think you should use him in basically every playthrough, because while his contributions may not add up to being more than C tier, they're basically free. Joshua is a really neat case study in how far good stats can carry a unit when everything else about them is holding them back, or alternatively, how much things like movement and lack of 1-2 range can hold a unit back despite great combat stats. I think Joshua is almost the best a unit could be in Sacred Stones without having a horse 1-2 range or special utility. Let's take a look at Joshua's performance throughout a Sacred Stones run. The focus here is going to be on Eirika route because that's the route that I'm most familiar with, and I also think it's his better route, for reasons I'll get into later. Joshua joins in Chapter 5 at level 5, and so he often gets lumped in with other early project units like Vanessa and Franz, and if you think of him this way, it's easy to see why he can be overlooked. Vanessa has flying, Franz has a horse, and both have 1-2 range, so they're more compelling targets for investment. But there's an important difference between those two units and Joshua. Their projects, Joshua is ready to contribute the moment he joins. This doesn't make him better than them, but it means you can get away with using him and them because Joshua doesn't need any competitive resources or babying to get up to speed. He's already up to speed when you get him. What I mean by this is that Franz and Vanessa take a minute to come online combat-wise. In the early game they can't always double, and even when they do, they can often fail to kill. As a result, you're spending time feeding them kills in the early game to get the reward of them being strong in the mid to late game. You can also only take on so many project units like this because you need to devote other units to setting up kills for them. Garcia can only set up kills for so many units at once. Joshua, on the other hand, can get kills on his own. He can double most enemies around his join time except for faster mercenaries, and he'll grow into doubling them as well. He also comes with a killing edge, and there's very little competition for it. Seth doesn't need it to one-round anything, and Franz doesn't have the sword rank to use it, so it's basically a free 10 to 20 kills for him. On his join map, you can recruit him and he can immediately one-round both the bandit reinforcements to the south before Seth finishes the map. And then on Chapter 6, you just have him kill whatever enemies you aren't feeding to Vanessa, Franz, or Artur. I like to feed those project units some kills on the northern enemies, while Joshua deals with the soldier, mercenary, and fighter to the south. And the best part of both of these maps is that you don't feel Joshua's lack of 1-2 range at all, because in both of the places where you want to put him, he only does combat with 1-range enemies. The only enemy around the south that Joshua could fight that it would even really be nice to have 1-2 range for is the one shaman towards the south. So Joshua can easily get a free couple levels that no one else is really contesting, and it barely cuts into your EXP for your project units, because you're going to be setting up kills for them elsewhere, and there's still leftover enemies for Joshua to fight. Then on Chapter 7, there's a couple approaches you can take to the map. If you rescue drop Seth and Eirika over the river, Joshua can kill whoever you want on the bottom route. If you go south around the mountains, Joshua can either do filler combat, or you can just send him up by the ballista to kill the mage and the fighter there. Joshua is well suited to this job because he can do it alone, while Franz or Vanessa might need a buddy or might have other things to be doing. Either way, it's easy for Joshua to just grab a couple kills on this map. And around this point, you're probably done with or close to done with that first killing edge. But by now, Joshua has also gained a few levels, and his speed is starting to become significantly higher than most enemies, which means we can upgrade him to a steel sword, and he can double slower enemies with that. So for fast, squishy enemies, you use the iron sword, and for slower, tougher enemies, you use the steel sword. And Joshua with this setup can one-round a good amount of enemies. With this setup, Joshua can also set up kills for other units when you need him to. If you want to give a kill to Vanessa instead of Joshua, you just pick the worst weapon type. If it's a tough but slow enemy, you use the iron sword so Joshua will lack the power to kill. And if it's a fast enemy, you use the steel sword so he won't double. Then Vanessa can pick up the scraps. Basically, from his join time to Chapter 8, there's just a bunch of kills that Joshua can grab for free, and this allows him to get some gains without eating any significant resources. It's really easy to just send Joshua off to some random part of the map to go kill enemies. Just make sure to pack him a Vulnerar-E and he's good to go. These early contributions aren't super important, but they're basically free and they're going to pay off later, especially in Eirika route. The very first map of Eirika mode is a route map, and Joshua gets to do a lot of combat in it. Seth and your next most durable combat unit have important jobs to do in this map. One of them has to run by a bunch of enemies to get to the Draco Shield village, and the other wants to be rescue dropped south to pick up the Rapier village and begin routing the southern portion of the map. The rest of your army is going to be dealing with the leftover enemies in the top left, as well as reinforcements that spawn there. There's only one mage here that doesn't die to your paladin's initial charge through to get to the village, so Joshua can easily pick up a lot of kills here. And these kills actually are important contributions because it's a route map, so Joshua taking all of these guys out is actually conducive to progressing through the game. You also get a second killing edge here, and Joshua remains a good contender for it, although it's possible that your second paladin can use it now depending on who you promoted and if you worked on their sword rank at all. Chapter 10 has tons of brigands that Joshua can take on as needed. Most likely, your two best units will be heading over to Garrick or the boss, while your other units will be stuck dealing with the many fighters, brigands, and soldiers. They are mostly one-range enemies, save for a couple archers and a hand axe fighter, and since your two best units are busy taking care of the objectives, Joshua's going to be one of your best combat options here. He can double everything and he'll one-round some of the enemies here, whereas most of your other units will fail to double some of the enemies and will not one-round the things that Joshua doesn't one-round. So he's our best combat performer here. We also get our first hero crest on this map, but it's pretty much earmarked for Garrick. Joshua does have a speed advantage on Garrick, but Garrick with a hero promotion has respectable enough speed to double the enemies he needs to, plus higher strength, durability, and access to axes. So Garrick gets this crest. It's not a huge deal though, because the promotion doesn't make a big difference for Joshua yet anyway. In all the upcoming areas where a sword user can excel, Joshua can hit the breakpoints that he needs to without the promotion, so it's not a big deal to have to put it off until the second hero crest shows up in chapter 14. And the next 5 chapters shake out pretty similar for Joshua. We have multiple route maps and a survive map coming up, and all of them either have a portion of the map loaded with one-range enemies that Joshua can handle, or include multiple enemies that are too fast for most of your army to double, whether that be the monster dogs on the route maps or the rangers in chapter 13, who are surprisingly difficult to double since their speed can be as high as 16. Without a speed wing, even units like Seth can have a hard time doubling here, but Joshua can do it. Chapter 14 is one of the weaker mid-game maps for Joshua because all of the rooms have 1 and 2 range enemies. You can find combat for him to do, but there aren't many places where you can just send him and have him solve a problem on his own. The one place where he could theoretically have a niche here is that he is a unit that could potentially double Carlisle's 19 speed, but it's a bit too much of a stretch. He would need the early hero crest and a handful of level ups on top of that to hit that breakpoint. You can find random combat for him to do on this map, but it's not that impressive for him. Fortunately, we get our second hero crest here, and there's no real competition for it. Assuming you gave the first hero crest to Garrick, the only other people you even could give this one to are Ross, who doesn't need it because he should have gone down the Berserker path, Marissa, who is just worse than Joshua, and Garcia, who doesn't have much to do for the rest of the game due to his low speed, even in the hero class. You could make an argument for promoting Garcia for improved 1-2 range combat, but the reality is we're pretty much set on 1-2 range enemy phasers. We have Garrick, Cormag, Seth, and we're about to pick up Dusel, and there aren't many situations left in the game where we need a 5th slow 1-2 range damage dealer. So for me, this hero crest is basically always Joshua's. And we get a decent payoff for this promotion immediately, as he becomes a good answer for one of the harder bosses in the game in chapter 15. Kalak is a tricky boss in this map because he's difficult to double, his bulk is solid, and he deals good damage. There aren't too many clean answers to him, as you need 16 speed to double him versus his Tomahawk, and 17 speed to double him versus his Silver Axe. Garrick and Seth can both do it with a speed wing, and Cormag could do it with a speed wing if he also hits a couple speed levels, but Joshua can always do it. Depending on how much Joshua leveled, you either hand him the Silver Sword and he dispatches Kalak in 3 rounds of combat, or if he's hit 21 speed, he can use the Silver Blade and do it in 2. Additionally, depending on how much you used Joshua, he might have hit S-rank swords, in which case he can use the Aldholma and get this done in 2 rounds of combat, assuming that you're playing Eirika route. After this, there's not a ton for Joshua to do as we enter the warp skip portion of the game, and Joshua probably isn't the guy getting warped. You can still find occasional combat for Joshua to do, and if you aren't warp skipping, then you can find plenty of combat for him to do. but his contributions are relatively unimportant at this point. Still, he's had about 10 chapters of solid contributions. That's about half the game. So why C tier for Joshua if he's contributing for so long? The reason is that while you can always find something for Joshua to do, it's rarely the most important thing, and he's often not the only one that can do it. Sometimes you need 1-2 range to enemy phase a specific part of the map, and sometimes you need a horse to get where you need to go quickly. Take Chapter 9 for example. This is a good map for Joshua because there's lots of enemies for him to kill, but it's important to remember that he's doing the third most important job on the map. And the only reason he's the one doing it is because there's 2 more important jobs that need doing that we're sending our 2 better units to do. This is why Eirika route is a little kinder to Joshua. There are a lot of route maps where you just have to send someone to a corner of the map to kill something, and Joshua always does this well, but there's less of that in Ephraim route. Additionally, while Joshua does these combat jobs well, he's usually not the only answer. Like, in the Fog of War route map on Eirika mode, I like to send Joshua down south to kill the enemies there, but he's not the only one that could do that. You could just send a couple flunky units to do that instead of just sending Joshua if you needed to. And this is true for several maps where there are tasks that Joshua can complete, but he's usually not the only one that can do it, and it's usually not the most important task on the map. He does have a few moments where his contributions are pretty unique, though. His performance against Kalak is legitimately impressive because most other candidates for that job need a speedwing, and he can also double faster enemies like gargoyles, rangers, and dogs that other units can struggle to double. The fact that he doesn't need any babying is also a big point in his favor. Sometimes people call units that do filler combat against generics flunkies, and Joshua is almost king of the flunkies. Once you've decided what your most important units are doing on a map, you can throw Joshua at whatever clump of 1-range enemies is left, and if your most important units are struggling with a fast enemy, Joshua can ascend from his flunky role for a chapter to do some important combat. I mentioned earlier that I think Eirika route is Joshua's best route, and the reason for that is that movement is a lot more emphasized in Ephraim route, and there aren't as many route maps. Instead, we have more kill boss and seize maps, and in these maps, Joshua can struggle to keep up without a rescue drop. He can still find combat to do, but it's a little more effort to make him excel compared to an Eirika route where his combat is a lot more emphasized. Eirika mode just has that one more route map where every kill Joshua gets is conducive to winning, and the other maps are like Garrick's Join map where there's easy combat for Joshua to do, or the Survive map where there are high-speed rangers that Joshua can help you kill. Something that people often bring up as one of Joshua's biggest issue is his lack of 1-2 range, but I actually think he has 2 bigger issues, namely low move and lack of special utility. Let's take a look at the people I put above Joshua on my Eirika mode tier list. Immediately above him are Mur, Artur, and Garrick, and if we were to edit FE8 to give Joshua 1-2 range, would his position change much? I think he would at least jump over Mur, but possibly not Artur or Garrick. Artur still has a strong performance on the monster route maps as well as warp access, and Garrick is just a little better suited to the enemy phasing 1-2 range enables due to his higher bulk. But even if you think 1-2 range puts him above both of those two, that's as high as he's gonna go. The bigger issues to me are his lack of move and special utility. If you look at the units above him, almost all of them have 1 or more of flight, a mount, good move, or warp. And these are a bigger deal to me. If Joshua had a mount or warp, then we'd really be cooking, especially in Ephraim route where he suffers a bit more from his lack of move. And interestingly, I don't think many other buffs would make Joshua more relevant. The only stats he would really appreciate are a bit more bulk and a bit more strength, but even if you gave him those things, he would just do slightly better at the role he already fills, and maybe he'd just use a few less healing items. This is the reason I think Joshua is about as good as a unit can be without 1-2 range, good move, or special utility in Sacred Stones. Even if we made Joshua an even more cracked combat unit, it wouldn't change that much about the way that he plays out, except maybe you'd use him to kill a few more bosses. Despite these limitations though, you should really use Joshua in almost every run of Sacred Stones, because his contributions are totally free. There's low competition for his promotion items, as well as for good swords. He doesn't need any stat boosters to perform his role, and in most Eirika maps there's multiple spaces where he can sit and one range down a bunch of enemies. He does have to get kills, but you're fine with that because he's self-sufficient and getting kills is conducive to winning the maps. Some of the units above him in my tier list are gonna see the bench in some runs. You're probably not gonna use all 3 Cavaliers, and you might not use every flyer because they're competing for resources like weapons and promo items. But in Eirika route, Joshua doesn't need any of that, and he's better than whoever else you're spending that last deployment slot on a lot of the time. In Ephraim route, he's a bit dicier, but you should still use him in the early game when you need to kill something because he's really good at it and he comes ready to go. Plus he's got a cool hat, and you gotta use the guy with the cool hat. So that's a look at Joshua, my favorite footlocked one-range unit in Sacred Stones, and probably GBA Fire Emblem as a whole. What do you think though? Is Joshua better or worse than I'm thinking? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments or in the community Discord that you'll find linked in the video description. Also, if you liked this video and you want to see more content like it, consider hitting the like or subscribe button so that you never miss an upload, and have yourself an awesome week.